Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to share about this work that myself and many others have been doing over the last 5 years on school level management of sanitation systems. So to get us in the right context, let's just look at what types of systems we have in South Africa. We have a range of systems from unimproved pit toilets to well-built dry and waterborne sanitation systems. When it comes to the challenges with sanitation in South Africa in schools, the challenges can really be grouped into two main categories: infrastructure and management. So first, let's just talk about infrastructure because that's a very important part of providing sanitation in schools. In South Africa, sanitation infrastructure is being addressed in a few different ways. On a policy level, there are the national norms and standards which set minimum standards for infrastructure, and that includes sanitation. Those were initiated in 2013, and that included a deadline for the government to deliver school infrastructure. While the deadline has continually kind of been pushed out, there has been considerable progress on sanitation infrastructure provision, and the policy has really catalyzed that. There's been a lot of advocacy from non-governmental agencies. For example, Equal Education and Section 27 are actively involved in advocating for policy changes and holding government accountable. And then, of course, there's infrastructure provision. So government and private sector actors are actively funding and providing new infrastructure to schools. And that has been catalyzed by the SAFE initiative, which was launched in 2018 and focuses efforts on eradicating unsafe pit toilets. So let's look at where we are with infrastructure. This is a graph showing from 2007 how school sanitation infrastructure has changed. You can see before the norms and standards, there was very little change. We weren't really building new toilets and we weren't changing the systems. But after the initiation of the norms and standards, the number of schools with pit toilets has steadily come down, and the number of schools with no sanitation has gone down to 0 by 2019. So we have made considerable progress, though the progress is perhaps slower than we want. But we must acknowledge that the efforts of government and private sector have contributed to considerable improvements in sanitation. But what about management of school sanitation facilities? We've talked about infrastructure delivery and that Department of Education and private sector are investing considerable funds in building new toilets. But once those toilets are built, they get handed over to the school, who then has to manage those systems day by day. If they're unsuccessful at managing those systems, the systems will fail and eventually they will need to be replaced. And therefore, we'll end up with this never-ending cycle of building new toilets and then them failing and building again. So really, infrastructure and management cannot and should not be separated. So I'm going to talk a bit about challenges with school-level management, specifically on day-to-day tasks and keeping the toilets tidy and well in a state of good repair. The challenges I'm going to talk about come from 5 years experience working directly with schools in South Africa. So first, we're going to talk about janitors or school cleaners. We have lots of schools that don't have janitors because there's currently no policy about appointment of janitors for schools. Some provinces may have their own policy, but as a national body, we don't have a policy for that. So when there's no janitor, cleaning of facilities is left up to teachers or learners. We have untrained janitors who cannot clean the toilets in a way that protect their safety and the health of learners. We have unequipped janitors who don't have the equipment and materials they need to do the job. We also have unsupervised janitors who don't have anyone really to report issues to and no one who's holding them accountable. So they're kind of working in a silo and the whole responsibility lays on their shoulders. And then finally, overworked janitors. There are janitors that simply have too many duties at the schools, and because they don't have a clear job description, they cannot, they get pulled into lots of tasks that aren't very important. So if we look at other personnel, there's often a lack of knowledge on the state of school toilets because school management doesn't always visit the learner toilets. And so they don't know where the issues are and therefore can't really do anything about it. There are too many duties. So obviously teachers and principals' primary focus is teaching, but I would argue that sanitation is central to learners' ability to learn, and so it does need to be prioritized. And then learner behavior is one of the main challenges cited by janitors and other school personnel. And then, of course, we have funding challenges. So when we're working on sanitation in South Africa, we're primarily focused on what's called no-fees schools, which are schools that are located in the poorest communities and are not legally allowed to charge fees to their learners. Therefore, they rely fully on government funding, which is about 1,500 Rand per learner per year. And that funding is for the entire running expenses of the school. So the first issue is just limited budgets to use on cleaning materials, because that small budget's got to be used for a lot of different things. Schools often don't ring fence funds either. So they are sometimes given guidance on how much to set aside for maintenance, but then there's no guidance on specifically sanitation maintenance. So the small portion for maintenance then gets used for everything, including broken windows, broken roofs, cleaning, etc. The current policy limits schools from spending government funds on salaries, and so they can't employ janitors. And then finally, fundraising efforts are possible, but they're limited due to the economic situation of the school community. So I'm going to show you a model that we've developed with the WRC, which is a management model for school toilets. It's packaged in a handy handbook called Healthy Toilets Are Possible, which is available to anyone who wants to access it. And just as a side note, most of the work that I'm talking about in this presentation is also available in the form of research reports that have been published by the WRC. So the management model talks about why we should prioritize sanitation, what to do to ensure decent toilets, who's responsible, including establishing a team and a chain of command and accountability within that team, talking about how can the toilets be kept in a good condition, and then where the resources will come from. So let me show you a couple of examples of the model in action. And I'm hoping by sharing these examples, you will see the potential for impact there is in this type of intervention, and also the gaps that need to be filled by different partners in the sector. So the first example is a pilot project at an Eastern Cape school, which we worked on this year. The pilot project was funded by SASTEP and was aiming to demonstrate the easy split sanitation system, which is a low flush urine diverting toilet. The project focused on the technology, but there were a number of management interventions that were also done. And so this gave us a pretty good case study of like a 6-month ideal situation. PID, my company, was appointed to do the monitoring and evaluation of the project. So specifically looking at management, the project included appointment of a janitor for the project period, training for all the school personnel, twice monthly monitoring visits by our team. And while those focused on the research questions, they also provided a level of accountability and support for the school. And then finally, the janitor had to report on their daily activities in order to get paid. So there was a reporting element brought into it. So the project had many good outcomes. Overall, the technology was well received, but I'm going to focus on the outcomes related specifically to management. If you want to learn about the technology, the research report, I'm sure, will be published in the next few months. So the frequency of cleaning toilets. Before the intervention, they were never cleaned. After, they're cleaned 4 to 5 times per week. I think this factor and all of the factors I'll talk about on this slide relate partly to the provision of an improved sanitation system, because now the school had a system that they felt was worth cleaning every day. So it was a good system that they wanted to keep working, and so they put this effort in. but obviously it was directly related as well to the provision of a janitor and the training for that janitor. The cleanliness of toilets went from 0 to 93% toilets rated as clean during an inspection. The number of functional toilets available to learners went from 3 to 15. So that obviously is related directly again to the provision of 15 brand new toilets. But I would also argue that the fact that 15 toilets were available and functional over a 6-month period during every single visit points to the impact of having an adult who's present in the toilets every day and picking up little things so that the toilets remain in a usable condition. And then another interesting outcome was learners who reported that they tell someone about issues in the toilets. Before the intervention, no learners said that they do that. And after, 62% said that they do. Again, I think it's related to a sense of pride in the new sanitation system, but also to the fact that there was a responsive adult in the toilets who was responding to the needs that they voiced. And because we're Fecal Sludge Management Alliance, let's talk about sludge accumulation. In this study, we found a sludge accumulation rate of 5.2 liters per person per year for septic tanks with low flush toilets. And a previous study showed school VIPs with a sludge accumulation rate of 8.5 liters per person per year. This is not surprising because VIPs often have a lot of trash in the pits. But if we compare that to household studies in South Africa, they found that the sludge accumulation rate ranged from 30 to 60 liters per person per year. We can see the difference is huge between a school situation and a household situation. And I just want to point out that there's a gap in the data on sludge accumulation rates in different school sanitation systems. And this really needs to be addressed so that engineers can design systems effectively and so that schools and Department of Education can plan for things like emptying. So what happened next? After the program, the project janitor's contract ended. The school then hired their own janitor from the community. She's being paid 1,000 Rand per month to clean the toilets 5 times per week. The money is raised by collecting 10 Rand from each learner every month. On the positive side, this example shows how demonstrating the positive impact of intensive management can encourage schools to take initiative. This school sees the value in the work that was done and has taken initiative to make it happen. But it also demonstrates the limits of school fundraising and the need for more support for schools to appoint janitors, because that salary of 1,000 Rand per month is really too low for the work that she's doing. And I'm going to talk quickly about the Domestic Janitor Program, which is another project where we've been able to implement this type of project since 2017 in almost 900 schools across the country. The Domestic Janitor Program includes provision of cleaning materials for schools, training for janitors and school management team members. In the past, we've managed to do some follow-up visits and support, though that's not as common now. And then evaluation of the school toilets before and after the intervention. The evaluation lets Domestos report on their impact globally on school sanitation. So just to tell you a little bit about the successes we've seen in this program over 5 years. It's a partnership between private sector and Department of Education, because whenever we work in a new district, we work with Department of Education officials as much as they will partner with us to schedule and coordinate the training sessions. The project has raised the profile of school sanitation among people who may not otherwise talk about sanitation in their daily lives. And the training sessions empower janitors and they give them a sense of solidarity. So just by bringing that group of people together, who's often not well supported, bringing them together, allowing them to share about their challenges really gives them a sense of community. We get school management teams involved in sanitation where they might not have been before. And then we advocate for schools to make budget available and for the Department of Education to support school sanitation. These 2 quotes are from janitors we recently worked with and just demonstrate The way that the domestic janitor program makes janitors feel more supported by their school community and also more equipped with knowledge to be able to do their job well. And to go into a few of the challenges, so we can see where some of the gaps are, where partnerships might come in. First of all, we always struggle when we're working with Department of Education to find who the right contact is and who should be championing sanitation, and particularly management of sanitation at the school level. We're often passed from one person to the next because there's really no indication of who is involved. So while sanitation infrastructure is pretty well, like it's clear who's in charge of that, it's not really clear who's in charge of the management side. Again, there's no policy for appointment of janitors. So in some cases, we don't have anyone to work with, or we're working with volunteers, which has its own challenges. The evaluation of the program focuses on the condition of school toilets at a given time when the evaluation takes place. And I think it misses some of the other benefits that happen in the project, such as improving how toilets are cleaned and what chemicals are used, how often they're cleaned, and the job satisfaction of the cleaners. So I think when we're evaluating these types of programs, it's important to look at all of the ways that the program impacts the school and the people involved. And then outside of the program monitoring, there's very little follow-up with the schools because the program is short. The time frame is short. It's only about a 6-week implementation period, and the budget is obviously limited. This highlights the need for institutionalization of monitoring and accountability for school sanitation, and also highlights some opportunities for other agencies who have passion and skill for those types of things. So if you are skilled at advocating for those changes, or maybe getting involved in the long-term sustainability and monitoring. So finally, I just want to share a few recommendations to improve management of sanitation in schools. As I've mentioned throughout the presentation, we need to mainstream the management and accountability strategies through policy change. This needs advocacy, policy guidance, policy development, implementation, and enforcement and accountability. There's a lot of people that need to be involved in getting this mainstreamed and brought into the system. We need to coordinate our efforts on school sanitation so that we can lead to systemic changes rather than just project-based improvements, because project-based improvements may last for only a few months. We need new infrastructure projects to consider the long-term management from the beginning. So I think training for janitors and SMT members should be a requirement of all new infrastructure projects. And perhaps looking at a 6-month trial period like we did in our pilot in the Eastern Cape would be a good place to start. It'll demonstrate the impact of that kind of system to Department of Education and school representatives. And finally, I would like to advocate that we raise the profile of school janitors. They really play a vital role in protecting the health and safety of learners, and they should be trained and provided for as such. I'd like to thank all of the participants and all of the work that we've done over the last 5 years and the many, many contributors to this work. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. As I mentioned before, if you're interested in any of the resources I've spoken about, please do write to me and I can get you those. I'm going to hand over to Ruth now, who's going to talk some more about this.
Great, thank you so much, Jeanette. Superb. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to be here and it's great to be talking about school sanitation together. I am going to be speaking about some of the potential new ways that the private sector could get involved in the school sanitation space. So Jeanette set the scene for us, highlighting the dual issues that we have with school sanitation infrastructure in South Africa. And I am going to focus mainly on the second one, this issue that where school toilets are built or renovated, they frequently fail after a few months because they're not adequately maintained. There is some history of the private sector being involved in school sanitation in South Africa, but what that's tended to mean is private sector donating toilets to schools as a once-off intervention. And so I want to explore this morning in this presentation is how potentially we can start forging longer-term partnerships between schools and the private sector, particularly in the space of operation and maintenance. So what do we actually mean when we talk about private sector involvement in operation and maintenance? Because there's a few different things that it could refer to. So the first is if we talk about the management of infrastructure maintenance and the implementation of that maintenance being outsourced to private contractors, as opposed to the responsibility resting with the schools and the Department of Education where it currently rests. So that is one thing that private sector involvement can mean. The second is for private sector investing finances into school sanitation or investing time in the form of capacity building and doing that in return for some kind of benefits. And that second area is where I'm going to spend most of my time this morning. I think it's worth recapping quickly why the O&M of school sanitation facilities fails so often here. And Bobby Lattin and Dave Still gave a great summary of this in a WRC report back in 2016. So they categorized the failures sort of under three main reasons. And they said, the first thing that happens is that there's a lack of will. So the knowledge and values that are needed to really drive change or drive good maintenance are missing. The second is there's a lack of skill. So there's a lack of the knowledge and expertise, both to be able to manage maintenance and also to carry it out effectively on the ground. And the third thing is a lack of means to pay the bills. So a lack of available funding or a lack of ability to manage that funding effectively and to produce the desired results. And we, although all three of these are incredibly important, we will be looking mostly at this issue of the funding and looking at potential ways that the private sector can get involved to alleviate some of those issues with paying the bills. So how big a problem is the bills issue? How much is actually being spent on school sanitation, operation maintenance, and is it sufficient? So this table gives us a picture of what South African schools are currently budgeting for school sanitation O&M. And the figures in the table are in the rands per learner per year that schools report to be spending on maintaining their toilets and sanitation systems. It's worth noting that these figures are from quite a small data set, and we do have some ongoing work to try and expand that data set, get better figures for both what schools are spending and also for what they should be spending to adequately maintain their systems. But you can see in those no-fee schools, the quintiles 1 to 3, on average, they're spending around 23 Rand per learner per year in maintaining their systems. So if we look at that in a different way on this slide, are they spending enough? So again, on the y-axis, we've got what they're budgeting, and those green bars on the chart represent what single schools are spending each year on sanitation maintenance. And then each of the horizontal lines represents a threshold for what they ideally should be spending. So if schools are to cover the cost just of cleaning materials for their toilets, they need to be spending around 28 Rand per learner per year, we estimate. And you can see around half the schools in this sample were spending that. However, if we now add in the costs of minor repairs and some infrastructure improvements, we can see the number drops to around 10% of the sample size who are managing to spend that. And then if we add in the bigger ticket items, so things like deep cleaning, staff training, larger repairs, none of the schools that were surveyed were spending anywhere near that amount. And this, what this graph is telling us is really reflected in the situation that we see on the ground at schools. So if we move away from the school level to the bigger picture, and we look at the entire Department of Basic Education budget, we estimated that in 2021, if every public school in the country was spending what we think they needed to adequately maintain their sanitation systems, it would account for about 0.5% of the total DBE budget, which feels like a reachable target. And so I think the message from that is that the problem is less at the level of there not being enough funds in the overall pot. It's more about, do those funds actually get spent on maintenance in a meaningful way? And certainly if we then go down and look at the school and the provincial level, there are problems with enough funding being spent on maintenance. And there are multiple facets to that. So some of it is about the guidance being insufficient or the guide values being too low for what should be spent on maintenance. Another aspect to it is that even where guidance does exist, schools are not necessarily following that guidance. And often that is because they're having to make very difficult decisions with small budgets and are pulled in many different directions. Other issues with funding of school sanitation O&M that I want to mention. Firstly, the funding for maintenance is often not used effectively. And again, there are multiple issues associated with that. And I will just highlight one of them here, that one of the things that happens is that maintenance work is not planned. It is reactive rather than planned. And so small issues quickly become very big, expensive issues to fix. Another issue with the funding for school sanitation, operation and maintenance is that funding is often delayed in arriving where it's needed. And there are various ways that those delays can happen. And again, I will just highlight one of the more interesting ones. Provincial education departments appoint maintenance contractors to do various tasks for them. Often there are delays in paying those contractors. And what that means is that if it's a small contractor, they will quickly go out of business because they cannot handle the issues with the cash flow. So you've got contractors going out of business, or you've got contractors that just don't want to work for the department because of those delays in getting paid. And so with that backdrop to the issues that there are with funding for O&M, we asked the question, would it help to create additional revenue streams to finance infrastructure O&M at schools? And again, there's a lot that can be said on this, and I'm going to highlight 4 points in its favor. The first is that, as we've said, schools, no-fee schools struggle with their budgets. And so extra money coming in is always going to help and avoid other areas of school life being neglected. The second thing is that if you could generate revenue at the school level, it provides an easily accessible funding stream. So it avoids those issues with delayed payments. The third point is that if you can generate revenue at the school level in partnership with a private sector partner, you've now got an opportunity to ring fence that funding and make sure it gets spent on maintenance. And you've also got an opportunity to do quality control on work that's carried out and build in performance clauses to that. Fourthly, this provides you with an opportunity to create those long-term partnerships between the private sector and the schools in a much more meaningful way than just a once-off donation of toilets. So if we think it is a good idea to try and generate this additional revenue at the school level, how could we do that? And how could the private sector be involved? And a good starting point for exploring that question is to think about, well, what's in it for the private sector? You know, what benefits could a school offer to the private sector in return for investing in sanitation, operation and maintenance? And one of the potential benefits is advertising space. So schools have lots of space. Why can't they rent that to private sector? Another potential benefit is consumer data. So particularly for no-fee schools, private sector finds it hard to get consumer data from those lower income areas. And if schools can be a route to getting that, it's quite an attractive proposition. Third thing in the South African context is assisting firms with achieving their broad-based Black economic empowerment goals. It's again, something I'm not going to have time to go into this morning. And the fourth is going back to this idea of creating these long-term partnerships. And the benefits to the private sector in that is that if they've got a long-term relationship with a school, it really starts to boost their image and boost community relations. And so thinking about those benefits, we then looked at various possible different revenue generation models for schools. So we looked at the idea of advertising or school branding. We looked at free public Wi-Fi as a vehicle for advertising and gathering consumer data. We also looked at product sales via schools, BBBE partnerships, and long-term CSI partnerships. I will be just commenting briefly on the first two. So if we look at the possible potential for advertising, here are some examples of what that could look like. So putting billboards on school properties, painting school property walls in return for revenue from the private sector for renting that space. And taking the concept a bit further, why not brand the entire school? So taking the concept that's used with small corner shops in townships, where a company will come and rebrand the shop, Potentially that could be done at the school level, again, in return for a revenue stream for that. There are a number of considerations with these, and I'll highlight a few. The first difficulty with the advertising model is that things like billboards and wall paintings have relatively high upfront costs, which affects the potential revenue that might be raised. There are definitely some ethical considerations with advertising in the school context. And from the brand's point of view, the advertising potential of a school varies very much by the school. You know, some are going to be great prospects by busy main roads, others are not going to be so great. And it's also difficult to measure the impact of that advertising. And the final point on this is a brand is only going to want to be associated with a school if the school looks visibly well maintained. The second model that we looked at was this idea of using free public Wi-Fi. So the rationale behind that is that cell phone data is expensive in South Africa. If people know that they can get free data somewhere, it means they have more to spend on other things. People have a very high consciousness of that. And the opportunity for the brand is to host a free public Wi-Fi hotspot and use it to put out advertising, but also use it to put out short surveys on the Wi-Fi access screen and using that as a method of gathering consumer data. So the idea would be that the brand would pay for the hardware and pay for a free monthly data allowance. And where the schools come into this is that the brand can use schools as the places to host the public Wi-Fi hotspots, making it very easy for them to get an entry into an area where it might otherwise be quite difficult. The way that this raises revenue for the schools is that once a member of the public has used their free capped data allowance for the month, they then have an opportunity to buy further data from the school, and the school will sell it to them at a slight markup. So that's where the revenue stream comes in. Again, there are a number of considerations with this, but the main one that I want to highlight is that from the brand's point of view, the impact is very measurable, and the consumer data that they're getting back is extremely valuable. We're running a project, a WRC project at the moment, to try and pilot this Wi-Fi model. But the one thing that I want to raise about all these different revenue generation models is that generating the income is only half the solution. We still need that robust structure in place to make sure that funding that's raised is actually spent effectively on infrastructure maintenance. And so we come back to the slide again of the 3 reasons why O&M fails, and come back to the central issue of the lack of skill. So more funding alone is not going to solve all the problems. And we need private sector involvement as well to address the skills issue. And so there are a number of ways that private sector could be involved in that. The first, I think, importantly, is to build in-school capacity for basic maintenance so that schools are not outsourcing small tasks and spending money ineffectively on that. The final thing that I want to raise on this is that there's a good case for a natural monopoly for school sanitation maintenance. So in the sense of having one contractor who is responsible for a single school district and who manages multiple small contractors under them. And what this means is you've then got contractors that are fully utilized, maintenance work can be planned, you've got the opportunity to do quality assurance, and that means that the price of maintenance is going to come down and that schools are using their funding more cost effectively. So I want to finish there just by saying, I think there are tremendous opportunities for the private sector and for schools to partner together to improve sanitation O&M. And I'm excited to see where this conversation goes in the future. So thank you. I'm going to pass it over now to Edna. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Yeah, as I've said, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm gonna take us through some of the solutions for O&M challenges that SASTA program has encountered in their research. So just a little bit of background on the SASTA program. It is a South African Sanitation Technology Enterprise Program. It's a program within the Water Research Commission. in South Africa, and then it is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Department of Science and Innovation. Water Research Commission is working with the Department of Basic Education, as well as the Presidency, on the SAFE initiative that was formed by the presidency to actually eradicate pit latrines in South Africa. So we're currently working with 2 schools where we're piloting and demonstrating sanitation technologies through our different commercial partners. We have demonstrated in Gauteng in 3 schools, as well as in the Northwest and Eastern Cape. We are demonstrating technologies in 6 schools. So just a little bit of a background on the Sanitation Appropriate for Education initiative, which is the SAFE initiative. It is a partnership between United Nations, as well as the Nelson Mandela Foundation, as well as the National Education Collaboration Trust, to also including the private sector. To the primary objective of this initiative is actually to eradicate pit toilets and to replace that with appropriate sanitation that will be safe for the learners of the different schools that we have in South Africa. So to be able to achieve this, what we did was engage with the different technology partners to actually have a toolbox of technologies that we will be able to demonstrate. We then did a needs analysis to match the different technologies with the different schools to gather information, to conduct site-specific evaluation, and actually match the technologies with different schools, looking at the water availability, the requirements on site, electricity availability, as well as accessibility of the school to be able to access the school, to be able to provide those technologies. So these are just examples of some of the technologies that we've worked, some of the schools that we've currently demonstrated in. This is the before picture at a school in Eastern Cape. And this is the currently what the schools looks like after the demonstration, and also monitoring the systems. And then this is the school in the Northwest. This is what the school looked like before our intervention. And then after, this is how now the schools look like. So, and then this is another school where we are demonstrating a nature-based treatment system. This is what the school looked like. This we were actually launching last week on the 25th of October. This is currently what the school looks like and what the learners are experiencing when they go to the bathrooms. So with all these demonstrations that we are currently doing, the plan is to develop a toolbox, a technology toolbox that will assist in terms of accelerating the adoption of next generation sanitation technologies in the South African schools. We also want to demonstrate the cost-effective CAPEX and OPEX models for improved and sustainable safe and dignified sanitation facilities in our schools. We also would like to provide DBE with OPEX, CAPEX, user acceptability, gender intentionality, as well as life cycle analysis of different technologies that will be available for implementing in different schools. So with regards to purchasing agreements, as SASTEP is looking at, throughout all the demonstrations that we have and the data that we are currently collecting, we're looking to provide data to allow for decision making, so that we shift away from only providing VIP as a solution to our public schools. So that the Department of Education has actually a pool of technologies that they can choose from that require minimum operation and maintenance to be able to, and also has high user acceptance for our learners to have dignity when they go to the bathrooms. And SASTEP is also lobbying for long-term service contracts which will ensure that the technologies are sustainable in a long term to provide more sustainable technologies as well as safer jobs. So what we're trying to do is lobby for contracts that the capex that we will provide, the commercial partner will provide a capex that is inclusive of a 5-year maintenance, operation and maintenance contract that will be operational for the entire 5 years, where the commercial partner will be able to go and service the do maintenance on the technologies that they've provided, as well as sort of like your car. When you buy a car, you have a 5-year maintenance plan included. So that is essentially what we're trying to do, to actually include in the capex cost the 5-year maintenance cost, where the school won't be stressed in terms of how they're going to operate or maintain the system. The cost would have been included at the onset. And also looking at the issue of the quintiles, where the schools are actually, when at quintile 1, are actually provided with little to no funds for operation and maintenance. And then this will actually address, because the capex costs will then cover the maintenance costs for at least for the duration of 5 years, so that it gives the school time to actually be able to come up with a plan in order to either increase the 5-year plan, or maybe come up with a way in terms of funding the operation and maintenance going forward. And we're also looking into creating local SMMEs who will provide parts for maintenance as part of the project. As the data comes in, we're trying to look at how do we improve or include the local SMMEs, where they can provide maintenance paths to be able to service this innovative technologies. So what we did was just to do a simple comparison with regards to some of the innovative technologies that we currently have in the SASTEP portfolio with the existing technologies that are currently used in South Africa. And what we found was that of course, there were different assumptions that were made with regards to the emptying of VIPs, for example, where we find that the cost of emptying the VIPs is actually around 10,000, and the cost of the front end as well as the top structure is around 74,000. So those are the type of assumptions that we made when we were looking at the cost. But when we look at the overall comparison, we found that the first 4 columns on your left is actually the new innovative technologies, and then the columns on your left are the existing technologies that are currently used in South Africa. So it was found that the innovative technologies are actually faring well. They are comparable in terms of when you look at the actual life cycle cost of providing sanitation, and not only looking at the initial capital cost that you will have to pop out. So the total cost of 5 years in terms of the clear water system, for example, it will be 8 million. But when you look at the overall life cycle costs, looking at the water savings, as well as the level of service that you're providing, you'll find that the technology is actually faring well when you compare. So the conclusions that we made from there is that the innovative sanitation solutions are comparable with existing technologies. When you look at the capex cost per seat, as well as capex cost for the 5-year OPEX cost per seat as well. And then the innovative solutions includes an additional benefit of water saving, where it is estimated at 16 megaliters compared to your conventional water system. This is for the 5-year period. And then it is advisable to compare the sanitation system using the life cycle cost and not just the capex and OPEX costs that you look at. So yeah, thank you very much. This is the work that SASTEP is currently doing, and we're hoping as we gather more data, we'll be able to actually improve the cost in terms of managing the O&M of this innovative sanitation. And we're hoping that we'll come up with a brilliant solution for this O&M challenges that we're currently experiencing in our school. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Great presentations, everyone. Just before we head into Q&A, I understand that we are slightly running later than scheduled. May I ask the speakers, are you available to hang around for maybe 5 to 10 more minutes, or do any of you have to go? All good? Great. Okay, so I'm going to spotlight all of you so that we can head into the Q&A. Okay, so in the meantime, we'll start with the first question from Ryan Blythe. How can these initiatives be integrated into wider WASH schools programs? I think this was referring to Jeanette's case study.
Sure, I can comment a little bit on that. I think there's a lot of opportunities for this type of work, the management model, to be incorporated in WASH schools. So we have all of the resources are available. So it's quite a simple tool that could be delivered to every school. Like I said in my presentation, I think any new infrastructure project should come with this type of training attached to it. And the handbook can be given to all of the schools, and we can really get that going. And then particularly where there are lasting relationships in WASH programs, I think that's where there's the best opportunities to demonstrate the impact of regular training and follow-up and all of that. And then you might have an opportunity in our context in South Africa to get the local Department of Education officials on board as well. So I think, yeah, if you have ideas or projects where you want to integrate this, I'd be happy to talk to you about specific ideas on how to get that included.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. The next question is from Mevizara. I think this was in relation to Edna's presentation. Writes, does the technology toolbox, is it a tool that can be widely shared for the use of other countries, or is it specific to South Africa?
We're hoping it will be a technology toolbox that can apply to or anyone in any country. So what we're currently doing is, throughout the 10 schools that we are demonstrating, we are busy collecting information, and after collecting that information and packaging it, the tool will be widely available or freely available, let me say that, on WRC website for anyone to be able to get access to or download. So it can be applied for any country, as long as the contexts are similar. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Edna. I hope that answers your question. And then we have a question from Munetsi, who says, good initiatives. How about the aspect of mainstreaming disability friendliness as well as menstrual health management? I don't know who wants to tackle this question.
I can try and answer that.
Yes, please go ahead.
I think in all the new technologies that we are putting in, I think it's the norms and standards of the Department of Education that actually requires for all the systems to have disability friendly toilets. So in all the demonstrations that we are currently doing, there is that allowance to put in facilities that will be disability friendly as well. And then with regards to menstrual hygiene, SASTEP has now a new technology that we will be demonstrating in 1 or 2 schools, where it is a system that incinerates menstrual pads. It's a new technology that we want to localize into the South African market. We haven't yet started, but it's in the plan to actually incorporate that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question asking, is there any school sanitation management committee? So in any of your experiences, has there ever been some sort of management committee to handle O&M in schools? I don't know.
In our experience, has only been at like 1 or 2 schools that we've worked with, where they're specifically around around sanitation. There are the school governing bodies, which do all the financial planning for the schools, and those sometimes have people who are in charge of maintenance and things. But yeah, a sanitation committee is not really present at any of the schools, but it is something we try to set up when we do our interventions.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question from Orlando, who says, thanks to all the presenters, from your experience, what was the role of sanitation marketing to improve O&M of school toilets? I think Ruth, maybe you can answer this one.
Good ask. Orlando, can you maybe clarify what you're getting at exactly with sanitation marketing in this question?
Sure. So Orlando, please can you clarify what you mean by sanitation marketing in this question? And we'll move on to the next one. Oh, this is a question from one of our speakers. So Jeanette asks, Edna, awesome work on LCCs. Does incorporation of a 5-year service plan fit within the DBE's funding cycles? And is there appetite to develop policy that requires service plans with new infrastructure?
Thank you for that, Janet. I think in our engagements with DBE, what they're indicating is that in terms of funding CAPEX, the money actually comes from province, so it's not the responsibility of the school as such. So if you include in the CAPEX, you include the maintenance plan, then the province will cover that. And then the school won't have the burden of actually having to come in to deal with the issue of O&M at a later stage because of lack of funding, for example. And then the operation then will be, minor servicing here and there where the school can actually afford to take care of it. Yeah, so that is what we found, but we are trying to actually engage the DBE on different models that they can be included in their policy so that we eradicate this issue of O&M challenges in the schools.
Thank you. Next question is from William, who asks, if we already have challenges with existing or conventional sanitation solutions, how do we intend to not only provide the funding for maintenance of innovative solutions, but also provide training and equipping of the maintenance officers / janitors? That's a great question.
Volunteer for this one or take the first stab at it? I think it's a great question. And the first part of it goes back to this question of, is the department in South Africa, is the Department of Basic Education's budget big enough to start with to handle the O&M of sanitation systems, whether those be conventional or new ones? If we think that it is, then it's a case of improving the different things that make sure that the money gets to where it needs to be to actually maintain systems on time and maintain them effectively. I think it also speaks to Edna's work looking at the life cycle costs of these innovative systems and whether they are indeed higher or not than existing ones when you take the whole picture into account. Because if they are coming out a bit higher, then there's a case for looking at these additional revenue generation models and saying we're going to need something extra if we're going to roll out these off-grid systems at scale. But our sense when we were looking at the funding side of things was there is a lot in the basic education budget, and a lot of it just seems to be about the mechanisms for making sure that that money, gets to where it needs to get to on time, and then when it gets there, that it's actually spent cost effectively. So there's a whole bundle of different factors that come into that. Thanks.
Thank you.
I can add to that. In South Africa, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, which employed general workers and school assistants to all of the schools, or all of the public schools in South Africa. And that initiative sadly ended, but I think there was an opportunity to continue with that because the funding was set aside to employ those people, the janitors, who were doing important work at the school. And then because of the pandemic situation, and it was kind of an emergency program, it ended. But I think there's a model there for how to employ them and how to fund it. And then for training and equipping them, I think it needs to be kind of ingrained in the Department of Education's processes. So the same way that teachers get training, janitors should have training. And it's not that expensive of a task, actually. I think where it gets expensive is when you're doing it once off in an area and you have to bring a bunch of resources there. But if it were ingrained in like an annual process that was carried out by the Department of Education, the costs would be very low. So I think we need a lot of advocacy to get that kind of institutional change to happen in our context.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Jeanette and Ruth, for answering that question. Ruth, we have a clarification from Orlando saying he means if you have any experience of communication interventions for behavior change that may have impact or make easier for the operation and maintenance of toilets. If you have anything to say to that.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Orlando. Thanks for that clarification. And I would probably pass that to Jeanette and the work that's been done on the school management models there, because that definitely does include elements of that. So Jeanette, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I like your question, Orlando, because I've been thinking about it a lot since we've been doing this work now for 5 years. I think the whole program could use kind of a facelift to go back and look at the drivers of behavior and what causes people to not do these tasks, and then update it to bring in more of those behavior change and marketing points of view. So if that's something you're specializing in, it would be interesting to talk to you more, because yeah, we developed the model years ago, more based on research. So looking at what caused the issues, but we didn't do like behavior change research with that. And I think it's something that could enhance the work for sure.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Raul, who asks, what was done to prevent vandalization in school toilets and convince people to pay for a janitor? Was vandalization an issue at any point? Like a big issue at any point? Tell us your experience with that.
That is an issue at all points. Yeah, I think for us, I know Edna can probably speak to that too with the technology she's worked with, but it's always an issue, the vandalization. And I think where we see the change is when we have more presence in the toilets. So for example, one day I went to a school toilet where they just had lunch, and we went into the toilets and all of the urinals were full of beans from the lunch. And learners had walked all the way behind the school and emptied their lunch into the toilets. And I kept wondering, like, how did they actually get to the toilet with their lunch without anyone seeing them? And it really just pointed to like a lack of supervision and a lack of presence in the toilets. So I think that's one way that the project has dealt with vandalism is by introducing more people who are actually taking ownership of monitoring. And then the issue of paying janitors, I think, yeah, it's a hard one. I think with us, I shared about the pilot in the Eastern Cape, where the schools now appointed their own janitor, and they can't pay very much, but I think demonstrating the impact of having a janitor has been the most effective way of doing that. But yeah, it is a tough one because they've got constrained budgets already. So yeah, I don't know if Edna or Ruth want to add.
But okay, thank you, Janet. I think with regards to the school actually opting to pay the janitor, it's also ownership. I mean, if you had systems that were poor and were scared for your kids to go, and maybe they won't even come back from school, and then you now transition into a new technology that you can see value out of it. The parents are mostly willing to actually pop up money to make sure that just the systems are well taken care of. And also they, like Janet was saying, they saw the value of having a janitor there to be able to actually look after this technology so that it can be there for a long time. I mean, at some point, the very same school, the parents were willing to also provide toilet paper. So that shows that they are happy with the systems. They are willing to actually take care of it and make sure that it is sustainable in the long run.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is I think that there is a difference between urban schools and rural schools as well. And that in the more urban schools that we've worked with, there is unfortunately a sense that the school is sort of fair play for vandalism and for theft, not just the toilets, but just the school infrastructure in general. And that's an issue that we've struggled with when working with schools and testing systems there, but the school also struggles with generally, even when there's not a new system being tested on site. And I don't think anyone's really got a good solution to that at the moment, because it's a much bigger issue than just the school. It's sort of more to do with sort of community cohesiveness and stability, which is different in urban settings to rural. Thanks.
This brings me on. I think this will be the last question for today, to Fabienne's question. And she asks, she's thinking about the sustainability and scale. Do you think this can be applied with no donor support in rural public schools with limited funds for sanitation? What's next when funding stops?
Yeah, I'll take that a little bit. I'll take part of that. I'm sure you can also contribute. That's a great question, and it's an important one because, yeah, in our work, there's always like a limited period that we're there, and for us to do the work over and over is not a sustainable and cost-effective way. So I do think at least the management side, the management model side, I think it can be scaled up. I think there's a lot of ways that it can be. First of all, the cost of the cleaning materials, Ruth showed kind of the different costs for the different elements. It's not that high, actually. I think when we do training, we talk about the cost of the cleaning materials and how it's actually a small percentage of their budgets. So I think just even looking with schools at the actual budget and what it might mean for them is a starting point. Because a lot of schools, they just kind of think like cleaning materials, these things are too expensive, and they don't actually look at the numbers. So there's that, I think, yeah, so building that capacity in schools, even though they have limited funds, I think it's possible. And then I think in the South African context, what's next when the funding stops is that the Department of Education takes a front role in it. So I think the most important thing with the donor-led, donor-funded projects right now is to really invest in building the vision and capacity in the Department of Education to own it. Because as I mentioned before about appointing janitors, it's not that expensive. Appointing and training janitors, it's not going to be that expensive at a national scale. When it is expensive is when it's like 20 schools here and 2 schools there and here and there. So yeah, that's my thought.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'll just add briefly to that. So I think the point of a donor-funded project should be just to demonstrate the concept and provide enough of a case to the DBE that the DBE should seriously integrate it into their programs and budgets and budget allocations. So there shouldn't be this sense that donor funding is there to make this thing happen forever. I think the other point is that we should look at partnerships which are not just about donor funding and about CSI initiatives. We should look at private sector school partnerships where the private sector is actually getting some benefit back, and therefore they're getting something for their money, and it's a long-term kind of an arrangement. You know, like those benefits, can they get advertising benefits back? Can they get consumer data, other benefits that we haven't thought of, and go down those routes? And certainly, Fabian, I think the models that are going to be applicable in rural areas probably will be different to urban areas as well. And that needs to be thought about quite carefully. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. This has been a great session. I've learned so much, and I'm sure all the attendees have too. There are a few questions left, but I'm going to save this chat, and hopefully we can relay some of the questions to the speakers. Or Henriette, your question, maybe if we put an email of someone who can answer it, can reach out to the speakers directly. We can provide their email addresses afterwards. We also had a few questions about presentations being available. So I will discuss with the speakers. Are we okay with sharing presentations, or are there limitations? Is it all fine if we share the presentations after the webinar?
I think I'm fine with that.
Great. So
send you a set of slides, Michaela.
Thank you. So yes, we will provide the slides for you afterwards as well. But thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for staying with us even 15 minutes after closing time. Thank you to all the speakers for this great session. We hope you have a great day, or evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Yes, take care and goodbye.